Assalamu alaikum, and today once again, we have joining us in the studios here, Brother Ali Najaf. Thank you ever so much for joining us once again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We're going to be discussing a very important issue, and it's actually sparked by a video which comes from your country. You brought with you, alongside you.
Yeah.
Bill Maher is a quite a well-known Islamophobe, but the problem with him is that he's growing in popularity because people think he's bringing some sort of rationale to the argument when it comes to justifying that Islam is a religion of hatred, of violence, of treachery. Yes. A lot of what are your initial thoughts on this clip? Because I'm just fuming from that.
So, you know, it's interesting. You watch it, you get a lot of mixed feelings. Obviously, the nice thing is you've got a actor like Ben Affleck who's really defending Islam, which you don't really see a lot. But I mean, what's really relevant is the arguments that Sam Harris and Bill Maher is saying. I mean, Bill Maher, the only reason he's got credit voice is because obviously he runs a very big show. I'm more interested in Sam Harris's arguments because Sam Harris has sold a book about religion and just, you know,
he's a well-known atheist.
He's well-known. He's sold about 500,000 copies of his book, so he's quite acclaimed. Even though he's a bachelor's in philosophy and a PhD in neuroscience, doesn't actually have a degree in theology, but he himself does, you know, speak about religion and discusses, which I don't think we can discredit his arguments because of that. But I mean, I've looked at some of his content, and a lot of the arguments that he brings forward are they're unsophisticated and they're very, very flawed in their essence.
What's so flawed about bringing out a verse from the Holy Quran and saying, well, this is what your religion is commanding you to do? What's flawed about that process? Because you should be able to pick up any religious text and say, well, I can take guidance from this. And
you should, yeah. You should be able to. The only interesting part is when you take that verse and you say, well, this verse specifically says this.
Let's give an example, for example.
Let's give example of the hand cutting verse in the Quran, where Allah says if a person steals, then you must cut their hand. When you look at a verse like that, and you take it out, surely to the audience it was, whoa, this is really drastic. The only issue here is what we'll come and argue with Bill Maher and say, look, or Sam Harris, the argument that religious people give is that religion can be interpreted in many different ways. The essence of religion, the way it works, is that I come to religion and I try to get to it what I want from it, in the sense that if a violent person opens the Quran, such as ISIS, they can find justification for what they want to do. If a feminist wants to open the Quran, she can find justification for what she wants to do, very rightfully so, specifically feminism being the equality of genders. If a peaceful person wants to open the Quran and find something peaceful, they will find it. Religion, in essence, does not exist in a specific vacuum where it is immediately clear from all of negative ideologies. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. But the idea of coming and saying, because the Quran has this verse, which very few amounts of people decide to take literally, then all of a sudden I'm going to generalize 1.6 billion Muslims on this very idea. I mean, mind you, we never do that for Christianity or Judaism. We never say because Jesus says, if you find your wife to not be a virgin on the night that you get married to her, then you must beat her and send her back to her family house. We never mention those verses, even though there are some people who do take these verses literally. And yes, it's a minority, but we never generalize the whole Christian population. So the issue with the argument here that's being brought forward is A, the generalizing, and two, is that, again, religion does not exist in a vacuum. And I'll give a brief example. If you look at all ideologies in the world, you've got something like nationalism, something like communism. I mean, do we ever blame science as a system for Einstein building an atomic bomb? I mean, you know, Einstein influencing and building an atomic bomb, and then a country taking it and using it to kill other people. Do we ever blame science and say, well, it's science's fault because science provided that? No. We realize that the rationale of science is very different. It doesn't promote this kind of behavior, and the fact that some people took it is a problem. I mean, you've got many people who criticize religion, and some philosophers criticize even science because of these specific acts. So we come and say, look, we don't blame communism for Stalinism. We don't come and blame Christianity when Hitler says in his book that I am doing the Lord's work, and he clearly says that. In the same way, we cannot come and say, well, Islam is at fault here because of these things.
But the argument they put forward is, well, Bill Maher says it many times. He's like, you've got people who are intellectuals who come forward. They're people who have their PhDs and they've got their masters, and they come forward and they're ready to join a side and become radical.
Sure.
So where does this come from? When in the previous episodes we talk about using the rationale and using intellect and the value of education. If the value of education is flipping you to the other side.
Okay. So again, here's an example that we give. When we come and we say, look, it's a minority who do these kinds of works. Again, Sam Harris or Bill Maher might come and say, no, there's a majority that does this. Or not a majority, but there's a strong intellectual minority that does this. And the thing that we have to understand about religion is when a person comes and does things like that, as we said, religion does not exist in a vacuum. So when a person is killing, there is poverty that's involved, there's political problems that are involved, there is disorganization that's involved. All of these things are involved in becoming factors that a person uses to go out, persecute, and kill. Mind you, even if religion didn't exist, these people would still find reasons to do these things. Religion here is used as an excuse. Now, when it comes to the PhDs, I mean, take a clear example. Take an example of the person who was in charge of the 9/11 bombings. Zawahiri, I believe. That person, by his name, was a person who was strapped by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, taken, beaten for many years, interrogated, and then after that he decided to come out. He was a PhD, to come out and then to join the fights and take care of these, do the horrific incidents of 9/11. So even though the person is educated or is a PhD, there are still specific influences in their lives that make them the way that they are. Just because a person is a PhD or is educated does not mean the person is flawed from sin. The very nature of religion, the very nature of any philosophy of life, is that you can come to the text and interpret it in any which way that you want.
But let's look at the history of Islam. When you look at it from that critical perspective, you see a lot of battles take place. Even in the early years, all these are battles. They're not just, okay, let's have a pacifist kind of way of looking at things, or let's peacefully sit down and let's discuss. It's violent. Okay,
so let's take that point and move with it. I agree there were battles. I can easily tell you, let's just self-defend and say, no, those battles were in defense, which they were, but I'm not going to go to that point. What I will say is this. Riza Aslan's got a really nice book called Zealot. And in his book Zealot, he mentions that...
That's a biography of
That's the biography of Jesus of Nazareth, but from a historical perspective. And he says that when Jesus came to his people, as much as Christianity would like to paint the image of Jesus as a person who says, turn the other cheek, when a messenger comes with a message, there will be people who would like to stop him because he's going against a political time. So Jesus, within the Bible, there are many verses where he quotes that I have not come for peace, but I have come with the sword. In other verses, he says, if you have no sword, sell your clothes in order for you to buy a sword. Because he acknowledged that he was a man of revolution. As much as Christianity really wants to paint that image, if you look at the Old Testament, the Old Testament is a book filled with blood and gore. It's a bloodbath. I mean, there are verses which says, kill the infidels wherever you find them. If they oppose you, kill them. Just look at the Christian Crusades and things, such as that. The idea here is we never, even Jesus, Hitler, when he says that I'm doing the Lord's work, he's doing it in the name of Christianity. I mean, there's so many incidents of individuals who come and cause terror in the name of religion, but we dismiss that. Why? All under the banner of, well, they don't really believe in that. Modern Christians don't really take their text literally, so they have really no incentive in doing that.
But Islam, we're supposed to take the text literally, are we not?
Well, see, this is the discussion that happens. Some say, the text is meant to be literally. Some say, no, the text is meant to be taken metaphorically. There's an idea out there that says this. The principles of the Quran are everlasting. And scholars debate this, obviously, because it's a debate. The principles of the Quran are everlasting. But the actual laws are meant to be moving forward and reinterpreted. And that's why many scholars, for example, they take some verses and they have different opinions on them. For example, the Najasa verse. When God says in the Quran that a disbeliever is najis, some ulama take this literally and say, yes, he's najis, you can't physically touch him. Other scholars say no. It's not that they're najis, but there's a spiritual najasa. It's not that you can't physically touch him. Even within the text, many of our scholars disagree on these ideas. I mean, the idea of stoning it's not even in the Quran. It's something that's even debatable. Some don't even agree there's hadith for it. So what we're saying here is there is text which is interpreted in so many different ways. It's so easy for any person to take it and reinterpret it and say, well, this is what the whole religion represents. Now, there's an issue that comes about here, and that is, well, you've got all this religious text, but the majority of the difference between Christianity and Islam is that the majority of Muslims take it literally and they act upon it while Christians don't. That's the argument. Well, we don't see Christians blowing themselves up.
That's true. Like fair enough, the Crusades happened. That's what they say. Fair enough, the Crusades happened. That was a minority, they would say. Now what you're seeing is religious radicalism in the name of Islam. You're seeing sectarian violence internally within the religion of Islam. And then externally, you're seeing this threat which is posing globally across the world. So where do we stand?
I'll tell you. Let me tell you something about this. The political and economic position of people is extremely important in interpreting why they act the way they do. When we had the kamikaze pilots, the reason they were killing themselves is because necessity made them do that. The necessity of war, the oppression, the killing, made them do that, right? I don't go and blame what they believe for that, but what I'm blaming is the socio-economic political systems. You had a time where the Muslims were living in a golden age, and the Europeans were living in the darkest eras of history where they were killing each other over church and things, like that. So if we look at the world today, the area that's really oppressed and an area of extreme poverty and political instability would be the Middle East, Muslim countries. Now, some argue, well, look, there are other oppressed countries, which are countries which have political power, politically oppressed, but people are not blowing themselves up, or people are not killing each other. And I would agree with that. I would agree with that. There are some countries, but what we're saying here is the blame that we're putting is not on religion, but the blame that's being put here is on the specific, the economic, the political situations that people are put in that are motivating them this way. And again, I will say, even if religion didn't exist, people would find ways to kill each other. Because it happens in history. Religion is just so used as a means of killing. And that's the sad part, is that human beings reinterpret it and fit it the way they do. So when we come and try to generalize religion. So, I mean, just Sam Harris has one quote where he says, Islam is the mother lode of bad ideas. Or when he comes and says such a quote, that there are many religions out there and Islam seems to be the worst religion, the reason that statement is profoundly flawed and unsophisticated is because throughout history we've had examples worse than what we see of Islam today. It's just so happens that we have reached a level of history where the Muslims are oppressed and they're reacting in a way. Have Christians done the same thing? Yes. Are they also profoundly wrong and at one point had many wrong ideas? Yes. But to come and generalize 1.6 billion Muslims and say, well, Islam is the mother of bad ideas because people are acting upon it, that's not okay. And that doesn't make sense. How many times have we heard President George Bush, or former President George Bush, say, God bless America, we are working for God, this is God. America is a very religiously motivated country. 90%, polls show that 90% of Americans believe in religion. So this idea that only Islam is motivated by religion, or only when Muslims do it are they bad, or they're motivated by religion, it's just completely flawed. It's got no existence.
Let's look at the event which we're seeing, we're reflecting on in these days. The event of Karbala is an event which many times people say is a battle. It is a battle. Yes. Let's face it, it's a battle, lasts for a few hours. Is there anything which we can try and look at from a different angle? How can the event be approached from a different angle? Because many times people say it's not just a battle. But then when it comes down to explaining, okay, so what is it more than that? Especially when young people ask that question, okay, so if it's not just a battle between two guys, what is it? And that's essentially, I know we're going back in time.
Yes.
But it's very much, because I think the narrative of Imam Hussein can be used to counter this opinion that Islam is a very radical, violent religion, even though it is a battle.
Well, I mean, just look at that battle of Karbala. If Islam was a violent religion, now this is the interesting part, is both parties here
Are Muslims.
are Muslims,
Yeah.
right? Obviously, you've got one party. I mean, just look at this. You've got one party who, after they kill the grandson of the Prophet, who says to them, "Let me go. I won't fight you." They trap him. They take away all his support. They don't give him water when he gave them water. After they kill him, they behead him. They behead his family. They even behead his 6-month-old infant. They trample on his body. They break his ribs. They break his back. They take his women as captives and slaves. Who does this sound like to you? This sounds like people who exist in our time. What has ISIS been doing? Beheading people, young and old, taking women as slaves. This sounds like a very barbaric and terroristic system that exists today. And when I look at Imam Hussein, I'm thinking to myself, you're seeing a pure form of Islam versus a very impure form, which even till today exists. The terroristic aspects of humans will exist in every religion and every time, no matter what. And people will use religion to justify. And it's interesting, when Yazid first sees Lady Zainab, he says to her, "What do you think of what God has done to your brother?" As if God's responsible. Let's throw it on God, right? Because it's great to blame religion for it. So it kind of gets you to see, yes, there's a battle, but one side is not radical, and the other side is being extremely radical. One of the companions of Imam Hussein was going to throw the first arrow, and Imam says, "Stop." He says, "Why?" He says, "I would hate to start the war. Let them start, so in front of God, he sees that I never started, they started, because I don't want to start them in a war." So it's these things that kind of put things in perspective. Muslims don't condone these actions at all. And how many Muslims have spoken against them? And to make a generalization to say that most Muslims are like this is very wrong. Look at countries like Turkey, very civilized modern Muslim countries, Indonesia. These countries are Iran, for example, are forward-moving countries when some of them you've got more women in heads of state than you do in America or Europe. And that's phenomenal. You don't get to see that very often.
So what is it from the message which we can take as something which is inspiring to counter this narrative especially about jihad, because jihad is a lot of the time misinterpreted. It's a buzzword used in Western media. If you want to get your viewings up, you've got to use jihad.
Yeah.
You've got to use radical.
Yeah. Militants, fundamentalism.
I don't know, what other buzzwords are there? Like, I'm just trying to think now. These words, they always pop up.
Yeah.
What can we take from, because you've mentioned one of the stories, the fact that the arrow was not thrown first, but also what about the etiquettes of Imam Hussein even before the event of Karbala?
Well, here's the thing, before I get to that point. You cannot stop people from interpreting religion the way they see it. You just can't.
Yeah.
The very fact of
but we can present them information which
of
would
course,
hopefully reinterpret.
of course, definitely we can present that information. But obviously, when you have a stubborn group of people who are fed terrorism, up until the age where they're older and they understand, it's very hard to change their mentalities. But the thing is that you can never change their mentalities. You can, like you say, influence them. I mean, the example I give about Imam Hussein is before the battle started, and he meets the army of Hur. And Hur says to him, "You can't go through." It was time, where the sun was coming down and they wanted to pray. And Hur asks Imam Hussein to lead the armies. I mean, these are two opposing armies that are going to fight later. And Hur asks Imam, "Can you lead the prayer?" Imam leads the prayers. And then Hur's army had no water. Imam gives the men and the horses both water. He gives them water. And they drink from that water. And then they divert him to Karbala, and then they cut off his water supply. So it's almost showing us that there is a understanding that's happening here. And Imam, when he leaves, says, "Look, I'm not leaving for power. I'm not leaving to gain any control. But if I do happen to become leader, so be it. Because the person in front of me is an oppressor."
So what did the Imam leave for? Because if he's not leaving for power, just for clarification purposes, if he's not leaving for power, what is he leaving for?
Well, according to what he says, is I'm leaving to bring back the moral of the system of my grandfather Muhammad. Now, even if he was leaving to fight, and if he was to think he would win the war, or to become Khalifa, that's not wrong. That is his position at the end of the day. But he didn't leave for that. His main goal is to bring back Islah, purpose, and unity within the ummah of the messenger, and bring back those moral aspects that existed. So to me, that's always a standard example, that the Imam's treatment of others is a very human treatment. And even though there's a misunderstanding of religion, he doesn't let that separate him from others.
You mentioned many times humanity and then Islam, as though they are two separate elements. Humanity is always changing in that sense. Regulation will always be changing with human development happens. Where does Islam come into this? Because Islam and the relationship between humanity is what? Isn't Islam the parameter and the definition of humanity? Didn't Islam come for humanity?
The way that I see humanity maybe is a bit different. The way I see humanity is, when I talk about humanity, I am talking about something that's within us, our human aspect.
But within us is also an animalistic aspect.
It's true. But if we realize that humanity and Islam are synonymous, Islam in itself is the promotion and the progression of humanity. Islam is bringing out, that's why in the Quran, when Allah says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, فَذَكِّرْهُمْ إِن نَفَعَتِ الذِّكْرَ. He's saying to the Prophet, tell the Arabians, remind them so that reminder may help. What's he to remind them of? He hasn't told them anything to remind them. He's reminding them of the humanity that's been put to sleep within them, and that Islam was meant to reawaken. So Islam in reality is an awakening of the humanity that's within us that has fallen asleep. Yes, there are parts to our humanity which is animalistic and non-animalistic, tabi'ah and fitra, but in essence, Islam awakes that humanity and guides.
Why is it sleeping? What makes it sleep?
Well, I think human beings subdue it. When you have factors that are outside of, within your life, I mean, you've got greed, you've got these issues. Human beings.
Are these not all human elements which are brought forward? Greed is done by humans.
Sure.
Hate is brought about by humans.
Sure.
So how do I distinguish what is humanity? Because if I'm just working on, for example, my own greed, and I'm finding that from within.
Well, if we're going to say something is a human attribute, then it better benefit human progression, not in a selfish way, but in a positive, moral way. If somebody is kind, I would say that person is human. If a person is loving, I'd say that person is human. If a person shares, say that person has a strong humanity. If a person empathizes, that's a human trait. So we label positive human tendencies or godly human characteristics as things that are humanity, the things that we move for. And when I say human and Islam, I use those terms interchangeably because Islam is the guidance.
So that's why when we say that Abu Abdullah came, whilst he doesn't state himself that I've come for the Islah of humanity as such, he says for my grandfather's nation.
Yeah.
But it's kind of making sense now, because now this is where Abu Abdullah makes his relation to all of humanity.
Yes, exactly. So then when he's saying I'm going for Islam in essence is for all of humanity, his movement is for humanity.
And his grandfather's nation was everyone.
Of course, for no specific sect, but to bring people together.
What do you think is the most important right now, element that we as youth growing up in the West should be implementing in terms of our faith, in terms of how we go about propagating our faith? What's the best way to go about it?
I mean, this is interesting. I remember on my plane ride to the UK, I was sitting to a man next to me who happens to work in the US, but he's originally from here. And he's asking me, he says, look, what do you want to do when you graduate and move forward? And I told him, I've got just, generic ideas. I might want to continue maybe becoming an academic or doing this or that. And he says, so you don't have hopes in going in a higher level of political influence? I said, why do you say that? He says, well, the power is with politics. The power is with those who are able to politically, who controls us? The government. Who in essence is religion to most people? The government. I mean, they give us so many things and put things in our heads. We don't even realize that they're brainwashing us with so much. Now imagine if we had political influence. Imagine if we had 2 or 3 parliament members or congressmen or congresswomen who were Muslims. That is a huge step forward. I think political advocacy is so, I mean, we talk about it very little, but if we really want to talk about change, it's with politics. Imagine we had a majority in Parliament or in Congress. I mean, that would be phenomenal. We would be able to take countries which are poor, destroyed, where people are always in war, and change that to a better extreme. But it's unfortunate we focus on other things like, you know, it's nice to be a doctor. It's nice to be an engineer. It's nice to be a scientist. But you have to also ask yourself, how much difference can I make in the political world? I mean, and
not to say a doctor, engineer cannot become a politician at all.
Of course not. I think there are many doctors who are politicians. Many of them are, I mean, I just gave you an example of Sam Harris, even though he's an atheist. And, you know, I have respect for people who are willing to go out there and speak of their opinions. Even though he's in neuroscience, he's still able to become part of the general talk of philosophy. So even though you have one specific field, you can work in another field. That's no issue. But what we're saying is there's a lot of influence there. The Prophet was a politician. Imam Ali was a politician. The word politics just means control of power.
Today the term politics is used in a dirty context. It said it's ways of pushing personal agendas, but it's when you deconstruct it, it's power.
It is. Politics is known as the application and the use of power. How do you gain power in order for you to use that for something positive? Like anything, it could be misused and used positively.
Most definitely, and I think it's a very interesting way of looking at it. And today we've had quite a wide range of discussion.
Very.
And the fact of the matter is that there is a lot of things which we can derive benefits from. But also looking at the past, I think that is an extremely important point, especially when people are trying to pick out faults in the religion, just using very, as you've mentioned, unsophisticated arguments. The way to respond to those unsophisticated arguments is with sophistication.
Very true.
And a sophisticated argument would look at context, it would look at verses, but it will also bring out incidents. And one of the key incidents which we have in front of us on how the application of jihad should be and how the true way of, if you like, fighting is, and that's personified in the event of Karbala.
Definitely, that's very true.
And on that note, I'd like to thank you ever so much for joining us on this show.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Brothers and sisters, once again, I'd like to invite all of you to participate in any form possible. Write to us. You've also got the social media. Engage with us. What do you think about this issue? Do you feel like the issue of jihad is actually shaping a lot of the ways that we are being perceived in the media? And how do you think we can combat this narrative? I'd be really interested to know of any initiatives which are out there. And I'm sure there are across universities, which people are trying to look and respond to this growing Islamophobia. Well, next time we'll be, inshallah, joined by Brother Ali Najaf, and we'll be discussing some extremely important issues. So make sure you do tune in. From Zain Haider Awan and Brother Ali Najaf, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.